Very pleased to be able to present an all-star panel to discuss a topic that I personally believe must be top of mind for every American, and most especially for those who we have entrusted the leadership of our country to. That is the nature of the enemy that we are facing in the form of the Chinese Communist Party. And what has happened in recent months has been both a growing body of evidence about the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party and about the proof of its true nature that has been offered by a number of senior US government officials, starting with President Trump, Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the Attorney General William Barr, the FBI Director Christopher Wray, the National Security Advisor to the President Robert O'Brien, and others, notably Larry Kudlow, the National Economic Council Director, and Peter Navarro, the head of the Trade Office in the White House. These estimable individuals have helped document over, well, really more than the past few months, but in earnest, I think, in this year, the year of the Chinese Communist Party virus, also known as COVID-19, a, well, criminal indictment, I think of it as, that indicates in instance after instance with regard to this country and its people, as well as those of others in the free world and in other parts of the world, including in China itself, and most especially in what we think of as the captive nations of China, Southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan. These are nations that have suffered terribly. And in the course of our program this evening, we're going to talk about the ways in which the Chinese Communist Party has behaved illegally and criminally, both in terms of crimes that are simply horrific in their character, and then some that are genocidal, crimes against humanity on an epic scale. And we hope that by the end of this program, we will have demonstrated conclusively that what the Chinese Communist Party is a transnational criminal organization, and that it must be designated as such by the United States government, and more to the point, it must be treated as such. And consequently, so must those who enable it, who otherwise permit its criminal activity to be mounted, and in some cases actually underwrite that criminal activity. And in this case, I'm talking not just about others overseas, but American investors who are mostly unwittingly being induced by, we call them Beijing's bankers, captains of Wall Street, the masters of the universe and such, to actually put their money into criminal enterprises of the Chinese Communist Party, doing business as a variety of front companies, or in some cases, underwriting actually sovereign bonds of the Chinese Communist Party. These are activities that simply cannot be tolerated when one understands, and one most especially, one appreciates that we are enabling this criminal misconduct by underwriting, by funding, by providing essentially discretionary funding and resources for the Chinese Communist Party, a transnational criminal organization. I'm going to introduce, as we go along, the various individuals who are going to contribute to this evening's program. A man who truly needs no introduction, I'm sure, to this audience, and for that matter, many others, is Gordon Chang. He is one of our country's preeminent experts on China, the author of several important books on subject, including the coming collapse of China, and most recently, the great US-China tech war. Gordon is a fellow with the Gatestone Institute. You see him in all the right places. I'm very proud to say we have him as a regular on Secure Freedom Radio and Securing America, a new television program on America's Voice. And he has faithfully participated in many of these webinars and events of the Committee on the Present Danger China, for that matter, as well. We're always grateful for his participation, but most especially this evening to give us sort of an overview of what it is we're up against and why the Chinese Communist Party must be thought of as a transnational criminal organization. Gordon Chang, welcome. Thanks to have you. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you to the committee. As you just mentioned, Frank, China's Communist Party is a transnational criminal organization. And because it poses a mortal threat to the American Republic, I think the Justice Department should add it to its top international criminal organization target list and to prosecute it under the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Statute, RICO. China's ruling group is criminal to its core. And tonight, we'll start in late January. Then, at the International Falls Port of Entry in Minnesota, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents seized 900,000 counterfeit $1 bills from China. And that raises the issue, was Beijing itself involved? And the answer is almost certainly. First of all, this is a particularly sensitive crime, counterfeiting the currency of another nation, because that is considered an act of war. So Beijing does keep tabs on it. But more important, and in any event, what we know is that in China's near total surveillance state, the state knows virtually everything. Using artificial intelligence and big data, Chinese central government workers surveil 1.4 billion people with the help of an estimated 626 million surveillance cameras this year, and of course, tens of millions of neighborhood monitors and Communist Party cadres. In addition, the Communist Party has cells in every organization of consequence, and we know that because China controls the banking system, they see banking transactions immediately. And that means that if Beijing doesn't know of a criminal group, even a small one, it's because it doesn't want to know about it. From counterfeiting, let's go to fentanyl. We know that last year, fentanyl and other opioids, which are synthetic, claimed the lives of 36,500 Americans. Now, cocaine and methamphetamine took more lives, and the deadly toll is up in those substances because they were mixed with fentanyl. We know where the fentanyl comes from. It comes from China. And in China, there are large and far-flung gangs that cannot operate without Beijing's protection. Now, these Chinese gangs are international and they operate throughout the world. And what we are seeing is that they are making fentanyl and compounds in China. China is a country where it inspects as goods leave the country. So no container leaves China before it is inspected by Chinese customs officials and sealed. We also know a lot of the fentanyl comes into the United States through the postal system, which means that China's national postal system is a drug mule. And we know that the volumes of drugs going through the Chinese postal system is large. So Beijing obviously knows what's going on. Next topic, cyber attacks. The Chinese cyber attack us, and so do the North Koreans from Chinese soil. The devastating attacks in November 2014 on Sony Pictures Entertainment were launched from Chinese IP addresses. Because Beijing maintains the most advanced set of internet controls in the world, called the Great Firewall, Chinese officials had to see the North Korean attacks leave China, go through the Great Firewall before getting to Sony. And of course, the Chinese officials saw hundreds of terabytes of Sony data that was exfiltrated from that company as it came back into China. So in China, North Korean hackers operate openly. Let's go to money laundering. We know that Chinese banks handle all sorts of dirty money, including, for instance, as we just talked about, the North Korean money. China's big four banks are state-owned, and they have handled, each one of them have been handling North Korea's money. So we know that the state is involved, which leads us to the conclusion that Beijing is behind North Korea's programs of mass destruction. Now, finally, there is intellectual property theft. Each year, China steals somewhere between, let's say, 150 and $600 billion worth of US intellectual property. Much of this is done by Chinese state enterprises, and even when it's done by private companies, China knows what's going on. Now, of course, there are other crimes beyond counterfeiting, drug running, cyber attacks, money laundering, intellectual property theft, but we're starting to see a pattern. So the question is, what's going on? We should call this what Beijing calls it, unrestricted warfare. Unrestricted warfare is the thesis of a book by two Chinese Air Force colonels published in 1999. And these two colonels said that China should not be bound by any rules, norms, laws in its attempt to take down the United States. We know that Chinese officials are obsessed with something that they call comprehensive national power. They monitor this meticulously, they thoroughly study it, they constantly compare China's ranking with the rankings of other countries, including the United States, and they use crime to increase their comprehensive national power. Remember, there are two ways for China to increase its CNP ranking, as it's called. One of them is for China to strengthen itself. The other is for China to weaken other countries. And for this, they use crime. And that means that criminality is an instrumentality of state power. The Chinese regime is known for its viciousness. Mao Zedong, the founder of the People's Republic, created a kill or be killed society. And the result is that today, no crime is too big or too small for the Communist Party. Communist Party is a criminal organization, and it's our responsibility to prosecute it. Thanks very much.
Gordon, thank you very much. An excellent overview. And that leads us right into some of the criminal activity that the Chinese Communist Party has been engaged in now quite palpably in our elections. To discuss that and related topics, we're very pleased to have with us a man who served his country in the uniform of the United States Army in an undercover capacity in the Central Intelligence Agency's clandestine services. He's been an assistant attorney general in Washington State. He's an attorney. He's a best-selling author as well as a tremendous essayist these days at his own online resource andmagazine.com. His name is Charles Sam Faddis, and we're very pleased to have you with us, Sam, to talk a bit about what we've learned about the CCP's intervention in our own country, its United Front Work Department operations, its espionage, and the influence that it has exercised in our most recent election, well, still ongoing election of 2020. Thanks for joining us, Sam.
Great to be here, Frank. Thank you very much. Well, for those who aren't familiar, I mean, the United Front is basically what we would consider in the Central Intelligence Agency a form of covert action. Most people, when they think about covert action, think of guerrilla forces, but propaganda and subversion are clearly part of that, and that's really what the United Front is. It is a worldwide effort by the Chinese Communist Party to subvert other nations, particularly by working to subvert their elites or to work with groups that will push the Chinese Communist Party's agenda to the benefit of Beijing and to the detriment of whatever country we're talking about. In the case of the United States, we have seen this over the course of the last 6 or 7 months, whatever it is now, with groups like Black Lives Matter and other groups in the streets of our country, which are supported in part from abroad by Beijing. And this, you know, we're used to looking at this as something that, you know, it only occurs abroad, that occurs someplace else. It probably strikes people as kind of remarkable that that's actually occurring here, but it's nonetheless true. I mean, for instance, if you look at funds blowing into moving into a portion of the Black Lives Matter movement, you will see clearly that a significant portion of that comes through an organization called the Chinese Progressive Association. This is just one example of many. And that organization has two chapters. One is in Boston, where they specialize in annually raising the flag of the People's Republic in the town square. The other is in San Francisco, where they have very long, very close connections to the Chinese consulate, which is known to be sort of a hub of Chinese intelligence activity. The Chinese Progressive Association comes out of a whole long series of other groups going back well into the 1960s and 70s, all of which have had very close ties to the Chinese communists, and all of which have espoused a Marxist agenda on our soil. So this is a real and ongoing activity by the Chinese communists.
Sam, thank you very much. Let me get my camera up, sorry. There we go. Sam Faddis, I realized after I set you on this task that we have another duty expert on the subject of the Chinese United Front. I'm very pleased to have with us Trevor Loudon, who has devoted much of his life in recent years to chronicling what Marxists in our own country are up to that are in the service of the Chinese Communist Party and working to subvert us from within, not simply to affect electoral outcomes, notably the removal of Donald Trump from office, but also really to bring down our country. And so what I would invite you to do, Trevor, is to both flesh out what Sam has shared with us about some of these organizations that we know are tied to the Chinese Communist Party, but also lay out for us what the agenda of these Marxists actually is here, and why that represents yet another criminal activity that has to be treated with the utmost seriousness, because not least it has done such damage in our election this year. I think you have to unmute, Trevor. We're not hearing you.
Thank you very much, Frank. As Sam has pointed out, the Chinese consulate in San Francisco and the Chinese Progressive Association are playing key roles here. What has been established over the last 15 years is a network of mass voter registration organizations all across the United States, but mainly focused in the southern part of the United States and California. And these are run mainly by Liberation Road, which is a pro-Chinese communist group that is effectively provides the staff for the Chinese Progressive Associations. And so what they've done, they set up these group of organizations, like for instance in Virginia, they set up New Virginia Majority, run by one of their comrades called John Liss. And it operates like the old Acorn organization did. It specializes in signing up tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of mainly minority voters who lean heavily Democrat, but don't normally vote in big numbers. So they focus in on these people, they sign them up, they get them voting, they get them to the polls, And this is how they are flipping states. New Virginia Majority wrote an op-ed in the New York Times claiming that they were responsible for flipping Virginia from a Republican state to a Democrat state. They worked with the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, to legalize 200,000 felons and give them the right to vote to complete that process. Well, this network is working specifically in the southern states to destroy the Republican Party base in the South, to give the Democratic Party complete dominance all over the country. They state this in their writing. They're very overt about it. And in the last election, a group called Seed the Vote, run by leading members of the Chinese Progressive Association, working directly with the Chinese consulate in San Francisco, worked with a whole network of these groups in the key states. I'm talking Texas, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. They set up groups specifically in these states to work inside the minority populations to flip these states. And they were very, very successful. They work through groups like New Florida Majority. In Wisconsin, it's called Block. In Michigan, it's called the Detroit Action. In Arizona, it's called Lucha. In North Carolina, it's called the Carolina Federation. But what these are groups run by Liberation Road communists, with some help from the Communist Party USA, which is also pro-China, and they have done massive voter registration drives in these states. They have signed up hundreds of thousands of voters, and they claim that they claim in their own writings that they won the election for Biden. They claim that they flipped Michigan, that they flipped Wisconsin, that they flipped Arizona. They boast about this. So these are pro-Chinese organizations working with the Chinese Communist Party to flip states. And it gets even better because in Georgia as well, through their New Georgia project, which they claim flipped Georgia. Well, and gave the election to Biden. Well, we know it's not settled, but they're claiming victory. And in Virginia, they were able to succeed in flipping Virginia because they micro-targeted every precinct. They knew exactly who was in every precinct, what ethnicity they were, etc., so they could micro-target and flip and get those people voting. And the maps they used to do that were generated by a man called Steve McClure, a geographer, and very sophisticated maps. And he works out of the Wuhan University, China Geography Department. So they are using Chinese material, Chinese generated maps to flip districts all over Virginia, to the point that now Virginia is pretty much a Democratic controlled state, and was a big part of Biden winning, Biden thinking he's won the White House. So this is nuts and bolts on the ground stuff. We're looking at vote fraud everywhere. We're looking at corruption of voting machines. We're looking at dead people voting, and all of that's true. But what we're ignoring is that right in front of our eyes, pro-Chinese communists are working. They had 7,000 volunteers motivated in the last election under the control of these Chinese networks. 7,000 volunteers. In Arizona, they made 8 million phone calls. They knocked on 1 million doors in Arizona alone, all generated by pro-Chinese communists. So they are just going out there on the ground, door knocking, phone banking, voter registration, shipping people around in buses to get them to vote at the polls, all perfectly legal stuff, but it's operated in the interests of communist China, specifically to elect Joe Biden, who they love, and to destroy Donald Trump, who they certainly do not love. So we talk about foreign involvement in elections. It's going on under our noses.
Trevor, thank you very much. This is indeed of great concern. It takes the idea of Chinese influence operations to a whole new level when they are in fact interfering and deposing, they think, the President of the United States, who has been an obstacle to their ambitions for sure. We're going to turn next to someone who has experienced firsthand, both personally and through his family and his community in East Turkestan, the experience of the aggressive and comprehensive oppression of people of a captive nation. What I think it's fair to say the Chinese have in mind doing to all of us, but they have been doing to members of the Uyghur Muslim community, as well as others in China itself. As I mentioned, several of the countries that have been essentially forced to become part of China at the extreme hardship of their people and the loss of life of many of them. His name is Ilshat Hassan. He is the director for China Affairs at the World Uyghur Congress. And we've asked him to talk about the incredible systematic oppression of his people, and not least the extent to which they are not confining this kind of activity to the people in East Turkestan, but actually pursuing dissidents and others in this country as well. Ilshat, very nice to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for the committee giving Uyghur a platform to voice our concern, our plight. After tomorrow, the 12th of November, is our National Day Memorial. In 1933, 12th of November, first time in modern history, in East Turkestan, our ancestors, they shed blood, they fought, they sacrificed life, and established the first East Turkestan Republic in 1933, 12th of November. And then it was crushed by Chinese army. Second time, 1944, 12th of November. Again, Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, even Mongols, Shibas, all come together. We kicked out the Chinese occupation force, and we established again in 1944, 12th of November, the second East Turkestan Republic. It existed until the 1949. And in 1949, Mao Zedong, and together with Stalin, they invited our leadership to go to Beijing to negotiate with them. And under the Soviets' pressure, our East Turkestan government's leadership, led by Ahmadjan Qasim, the president, and went to the Soviet and take a flight to Beijing. But the airplane was mysteriously crashed on the way to Beijing. So all our leadership was died in that crash. Since then, the Chinese communists took over our country. Starting from 1950, they disbanded our national army and arrested all the officials and the leadership of East Turkestan government, prosecuted them through the so-called suppressing the anti-revolution, and then from the cultural revolution until today is more than 3 million Uyghur in concentration camp. And the Uyghur woman was sterilized and the birth was controlled. And personally, it's not only limited to East Turkestan in our country. It's already crossed the border. Come to the US, come to all the world's corner where Uyghurs live. And just weeks ago, one of the Uyghur who was forced to work for the Chinese secret police in Turkey, and recently, starting from last year, he revealed his identity and go against the Chinese communists. And last week, he was shot at night in front of his home in Istanbul, Turkey. Now he is struggling for his life. And this is in a free country, in Istanbul, in Turkey, the Chinese agent. And before the one day, the ambassador of the Turkey from the Chinese ambassador in Turkey was changed. And came another one guy whose name is Liu Shaobin. He was a secret service in the Chinese foreign minister. And he came to Istanbul, and the Uyghur was assassinated. And he is struggling for the life. And personally, me, my three sisters, my mother, and all of my relatives, all in the concentration camp. And a lot of Uyghur living in the United States. One example, one truck driver, he lives in here. Just months ago, he called me, say some Chinese agent forced his brother to call him and ask him to work with the police in China and offer the information about the Uyghur. And when he said, I'm just a truck driver, I don't know any other Uyghur, I'm just struggling for my life. The Chinese said, whatever you know in US, whatever you see when was there, send it to us. We need everything.
This sounds
That's
very
the
familiar.
Chinese hand.
Shot. This is very much part and parcel of the sort of totalitarian system we're dealing with, and criminal activities on our own soil as well. Thank you for your testimony, as well as for representing your people in this struggle against a transnational criminal organization. We're going to have testimony and witness from another of our expatriate colleagues. His name is Dr. Sean Lin. He has been a survivor of the Tiananmen Square massacre. He has served in the United States Army, where, among other things, he ran a laboratory at Walter Reed on microbiology and viruses that gives him considerable expertise on the topic we touched on a moment ago, namely the Chinese Communist Party virus. We've asked Dr. Lin to talk a bit about the threats that we've seen the Chinese exhibit towards their own people in a particularly horrific way. I should mention as well that he's the executive director of the Global Alliance Against Communist Disinformation and Propaganda, but he's also a practitioner of Falun Gong, and he's going to speak to us about the horrific practice some have called organ harvesting. I think of it as organ genocide against the Falun Gong people, among others, at an industrial scale, and what that suggests about the character of this government, as well as the magnitude of the crimes against humanity that is engaging in connection with organ genocide. Dr. Lin, over to you. Is Dr. Lin on? There he is. You're muted, I think, Sean. Can you unmute? I'm not hearing you. Dr. Lin, tell you what, let's see if we can come back to you and work that problem.
Can you hear me now?
There you are. Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry, my internet speed suddenly slowed down. It's stuck in the middle of it. Right. So thank you, Frank, for inviting me to this panel, and glad to follow these few great speakers. And I would like to emphasizing what's the nature of the Chinese Communist Party from a few aspects. One thing is about the Communist Party doesn't care about human lives. And just like Gordon has mentioned about the unrestricted warfares, and he mentioned about the fentanyl, I just want to emphasize a little bit on give a few examples. So probably this year, everybody know, the pandemic originated from Wuhan in China, and everybody know Wuhan was the epicenter, and the local outbreak turned into a global pandemic because CCP cover up. So I want to mention that Wuhan actually is also a headquarters for manufacturing the fentanyl in and outside surrounding Wuhan. There are big factories producing fentanyls, and the Chinese government didn't take action to really control or stop the production of the fentanyl. They know it very clearly because one of the richest guy in Wuhan was actually a drug producers in Wuhan. And the Chinese government pretend they want to take care of this problem. They sentence small drug dealers to death. They can do that. But the biggest drug lords in Wuhan producing fentanyls and other analogs, they let him run freely in the city. So that's the nature of the Chinese Communist Party. They don't care about human beings' life. They don't care killing tens of thousands of American people every year. So I just want to give this example. And of course, we know that when the pandemic spread to the United States, more than 200,000 American people died. And then they also still cover up the information, the true situation about the pandemic, about the death toll inside China, inside Wuhan. How many Chinese people know? We don't know, right? So needless to say, they don't care about how many American people die, how many people in the world dies. So there's one thing that Chinese Communist Party doesn't care about human beings' life. And another example is about their wars against all religions inside China. So whether it's persecution of Christians, underground churches, and Tibetans, Falun Gongs, Uyghurs, right? Many ethnic groups and religious groups are being persecuted in China. The Chinese Communist Party is waging total wars against all religions. And we know in the past few decades, more than 100 million Chinese people have died unnaturally under the communist dictatorship. Say that they don't care about human lives. And another aspect I want to mention is about they want to change people's spirituality and also your identity, your mind. One example is actually about this election, right? So through their huge propaganda machines, through their convergence of malign disinformation campaigns, they want to change people's understanding about what is righteous and what is deceit and fraud. They use their campaigns, try to make people feel, oh, democracies and justice has no hope in the United States. They want the whole world to see even the beacon of the freedom and democracy in the United States doesn't work, and they want to promote their ideology, their system, their totalitarian system. They want to show the world our system is better than the democracy. They want to change people's mind on this one. That's why when you see the corruption scandals, also the election fraud news coming out of the United States, Chinese media is very happily broadcasting this information. Let Chinese people know the democracy system doesn't work, and they also want to destroy the face of American people to its constitution, right, to the original path that our founding father established for the American people. They want to destroy this face. This is to change people, change people's mind. So we cannot simply think this is a small scale of ordinary election fraud. This is actually a coup. And I also want to recommend people to read the letter from Archbishop Carlos Vigano recently wrote. He mentioned there's a scheme of great reset to reset the new world order and make the world turn into a socialist, communist world. So we are in the big battle right now. So we need to clearly.
Oh, we've lost you. I'm afraid you've muted somehow. We're at the end of our time with you, Sean. Thank you very much. Very important evidence again of the criminality of this regime on an unimaginable scale when you take all of these various crimes together. Our last participant, I'm very pleased to say, is Maura Moynihan, the daughter of the great Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. She has devoted most of her life to the cause of Tibet. She has been an advocate for it. She has reported on what the Chinese have done to that captive nation, notably at Radio Free Asia, where for a time she was the bureau chief for Nepal. She has been a prolific writer on this subject and a member of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, I'm very pleased to say. And we've asked her to talk a bit about both what the Chinese have done to the Tibetan people, to their culture, to their history, as kind of a further insight into how horrifically they treat even people they consider their own, as well as what is now an example in Tibet and downstream from there of the horrific environmental predations of the Chinese Communist Party, another set of criminal activities. Maura Moynihan, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Can you see me? Hold on. Can you see me and hear me? Hold on. Why is it?
Hi, Maura. This is Dee Dee, the organizer. You just need to click the little camera icon next to your name.
Yeah, I did. But I can see myself, but I can't see you. Now what do I do? Oh, here it is. Can you see me? Hello?
Hello. I can hear you. I cannot see you yet.
Oh, okay. I wonder why that is.
Why don't you just go ahead and give us your statement, and we'll forget about the video for the time being.
Oh, okay. I thank you so much, Frank, for inviting me onto the webinar, and it is a real privilege to be with my old friend and hero, Gordon Chang and Sam Faddis, and all the other distinguished speakers. And my heart was broken to the gentleman from the Uyghur community, because the Tibetans and the Uyghurs have suffered a very similar fate, in that the land of Tibet and Xinjiang compromises almost 50% of the territory of the People's Republic of China. And it's a little known history that bears repeating again and again, that Mao comes to power in 1949. His first two acts of international aggression was the annexation in 1950 of East Turkestan and 51 in Tibet, which culminated in 1959 with the Dalai Lama's flight to India, where he has lived for 61 years, and the genocide that followed the flight of the Dalai Lama. And Tibet and Xinjiang were also tragically pulled into the People's Republic of China just before the Great Leap Forward, the 3 lean years, as they were called in Tibet. And so also in the obfuscation of the Cold War, the story of Tibet was absolutely lost. And I only learned about it going to high school in India when my father was the US ambassador to India, and I met Tibetan refugees. And then I went to China on my way back to the United States. And it was just shocking to me that there's just so little news and information that ever came out in these years, when out of a popular 6 million, 1.5, possibly 2, maybe more, Tibetans were killed, and 6,000 Buddhist monasteries, repositories of 1,000 years of great Buddhist civilization, that I had a priest-patron relationship with China prior to communism. The Emperor of China could not rule. He could not summon the mandate of heaven without the blessing from the Sakya Lama. And so this was all destroyed with the triumph of Mao. And what's gone on in recent years is that the Tibet movement suffered a fatal blow in 2009, when the new president, Barack Obama, who had also just gotten the Nobel Peace Prize, declined to receive his fellow Nobel Peace Prize laureate, His Holiness Dalai Lama, at the White House. And the message went around the world: throw Tibet under the bus, throw the Dalai Lama under the bus. And David Cameron followed, and whoever was president of France followed. And one by one, the Dalai Lama was cut out of all of this support. And what has happened since then? Well, Tibet has been the pilot project of the Belt and Road Initiative. It started with Shibu Daifa in the year 2000. And the Chinese communists absolutely loved 9/11 and those catastrophic wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that have cost us so much, because no one was watching them. And they were able to use Tibet and Xinjiang to develop these enormous rail systems. Military industrial infrastructure was put in, and the concentration camp system that we're hearing more about from Xinjiang now was developed first in Tibet. Tibet has always been the torture laboratory for the People's Republic of China. And so that a lot of the torture techniques and methods that were used on Falun Gong practitioners and dissidents and the Mongols, and of course the Uyghurs, were first tried in Tibet. So Tibet's like the Dachau for the PRC. Dachau was the first Nazi concentration camp, of course, which is in Munich, and all spread from there. And so, but you never read about Tibet, you never hear about Tibet. And the other consequence of this silence, and they've been very effective in silencing Tibet people like myself. I can't get booked on TV. No one will ever invite me to speak on a panel at a university. I've been turned down for every job at every humanitarian organization, media organization. The door shuts in your face if you're a Tibet person, because that is a priority for the CCP, and they have succeeded in getting Western leads to fall in line. And tens of thousands of hydro dams have been built all across the Tibetan plateau. And this affects the water supply for 3 billion people in Asia, the world's largest continent. So it's just an absolute catastrophe, environmental, humanitarian catastrophe. And this is the price of ignoring Tibet. To ignore Tibet is to ignore how the Chinese Communist Party contributes to instability, to militarization, and to environmental collapse and destabilization of the human race. And so I'm very cynical about the elites in this country who've sold us out. And I really commend the committee for the work that you're doing, especially Roger Robbins' work on what's going on Wall Street. Most Americans have no idea. And as a Tibet person, we've lost every single round. And I agree. I think it is a coup that's going on. Obviously, it's a coup. Let's just see if they get away with it.
Thank you so much, Mara. This is a vital piece of the story that, as you say, has been a sort of proof of concept for many of the terrible things that the Chinese Communist Party has done to others. But your testimony about the impact on 3 billion people, and all of the diversion of the watersheds of Tibet is just staggering. And when you add on top of that the air pollution and the ocean pollution and the destruction of fish stocks and so much more, we're really looking at criminal activity on an epic scale. I thought I'd take a few minutes to recap some of these highlights, and then if we can, Didi, perhaps take a question or two, and then we will wrap up. But very quickly, we've talked about, and think of this as a criminal indictment. Fentanyl killing tens of thousands of Americans every single year, and other drugs, precursors for crystal meth and the like, that many more. The counterfeiting of our currency, as Gordon was saying, an act of war, actually. Subversive influence operation, interfering with our election processes. Espionage, as Sam Faddis has talked about, technology and intellectual property theft. By some estimates, hundreds of billions of dollars every year has been essentially hoovered up by the Chinese from American companies and inventors. The persecution of the faith communities, mass murder on, as I said, an epic scale. The enslavement of others, including these captive nations. Of course, Hong Kong must now be added to that list as well. The debt trap practices that are part and parcel of the enslavement of others that they seek to make captive nations through the Belt and Road Initiative. The torture practices in Tibet and elsewhere, the organ genocide, the environmental predations, as I said, and so much more. Let me conclude by simply saying it is absolutely unspeakable, to be sure, but it is also something that we have on the statute books of the United States, the means of addressing this kind of criminal practice. It starts with the designation of the Chinese Communist Party as a transnational criminal organization, and then its prosecution, as Gordon Chang has suggested, perhaps under the RICO statutes of the United States. So in all these ways, we hope that we have, again, set the predicate for action by the Trump administration, whether it is a short duration or 4 more years to be determined. But for whatever time it is in office, this must be one of its priorities. And I thank all of our speakers for their contributions to making the case that that should be so. Let's see if there is a question. Didi, do you have anything from the audience, or should I just simply pose one myself?
I don't have any questions at this point in time, Frank, but
let me then ask particularly our guests from China itself. Talk a little bit, if you would, about something that has become an instrument for so much of the oppression, and that is now a burden and a terrible blight on the captive nations of China, the people of China, but is available for export elsewhere. And that is something called the social credit system. Let's talk with you, start with you, and maybe Sean Lin could add a little bit as to how it is affecting your community and the people of China more generally.
Thank you again giving us this time. For Uyghurs or Kazakh, all the Turkish Muslims, actually this social credit system is excluded. We are just as an occupied land slave. For all Uyghurs under the surveillance and under the tight control, they have a separate policy for the Uyghur. Even in the some road, they separated the road to the Uyghur can go and the Chinese go. So it's in East Turkestan, they implemented occupation policy. I don't say it any Chinese national policy over there. It's a oppressive. And I just want to add one point, the organ harvesting, very quickly. Organ harvesting, actually, it was started from the Uyghur in the beginning, the very early. And we have a surgeon, he has done the organ harvesting. Now the Chinese is promoting so-called halal organ to the Middle East rich billionaires. So we are become a database for the organ harvesting, Uyghur too. Thank you.
A cash cow, as they say. Sean Lin,
Yes.
A little bit about how the social credit system has been affecting your community and the Chinese more generally.
Yes, I think actually the social credit system is the key tools, key mechanism right now. The Chinese Communist Party can control the society right now. They rely on the big technology integrating with surveillance technologies, big data, and quantum computers. So they build up a huge surveillance network so they can control every persons in China, and they can monitor what you say on the internet, on any social media platforms, and they can instill any kind of thought on your mind if they want, because they control all the platforms. And of course, when they build a big database, they can kill anyone if your organ matches. And actually, the organ harvesting, of course, it started even in the 1950s, 60s. At the beginning, it was very small scale. And then when it happened to the Falun Gong, it became huge scale, and they cloned it to Uyghurs as well. So definitely, it's huge crimes against humanity, and I think the whole world need to know more about the truth about organ harvesting as well. And the social credit system right now, they use this technology actually expand it to other countries as well. Many countries are using the so-called smart city projects, intelligent cities, smart cities project, and they use Huawei's technologies or Zhongtian's technologies, right? So of course, you got a backdoor. This is you can control your data.
Yeah, the health as well is another piece of this on the export side.
Yeah.
Let me just see if is Gordon Chang still with us?
I'm here.
Gordon, I wanted to ask you to sort of make a conclusory comment on this point, if you would. If the Chinese Communist Party is identified as a transnational criminal organization, how would that affect, as you see, the standing of the party internally as well as externally around the world? Do you think that this would make a material impact in how others see it and also its legitimacy at home?
Well, certainly, Frank, it would affect the legitimacy of the party. What it would do as a practical matter is would put China at the top of law enforcement priorities across the country. And it would be not just, for instance, counterfeiting cash, or it wouldn't be just cyber attacks. It would be across the whole range. And that's why I think that if this designation were made, we would see much more resources of the federal government directed against the Communist Party. And indeed, I think that would be the prelude to a RICO case, because that would be a criminal prosecution. That would be something that would be very difficult for a Biden administration to actually drop. So yes, this would have a material effect on China's standing in the United States and around the world.
Yes, and I think if I could just in closing say, in addition, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, it would also make it very difficult, it seems to me, for Wall Street to continue to do business with the Chinese Communist Party, lest they be implicated in the criminal activities of which we've been talking. It's so important that this message be heard by as many others as possible. I appreciate so much every single one of you and your efforts to elevate this issue and to make the criminal predicate for designating the Chinese Communist Party as a transnational criminal organization. I hope the rest of you have found this to be also edifying and inspiring to action. We certainly will be doing everything we can at the Committee on the Present Danger China to advance this initiative. For much more about the Chinese Communist Party and its activities and the threat that is posed by them to us, please do visit presentdangerchina.org. It's a great resource, and I want to thank in particular our colleague Didi Laugesen for both managing this call, as this webinar, as well as the website, and for so much more. Thank you to all of you again. Please stay in touch with us at presentdangerchina.org and go forth and multiply. This is Frank Gaffney. Thanks so much for listening.